Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're about to begin a brand new love journey. Please comment on where you're watching from so we can see that our Soul Stories family is all around the world. Charleston, South Carolina, 9 a.m. The Belladonna Hotel shimmered in the morning sunlight. The Ashley River glistened like a vast mirror, reflecting the first golden rays that spilled across the glass dome of the Grand Hall. On a cream backdrop, silver letters stretched elegantly. Hamilton Industries, 100 years of innovation. More than 400 guests filled the air with a mix of luxury and restraint. Businessmen, politicians, media figures, shareholders, and international investors. Champagne glasses sparkled, coffee steamed, and the scent of expensive perfume lingered, while on every table a camera was recording. Behind the curtains, Jonathan Hamilton, 33, the youngest CEO in the company's history, stared at his reflection. His light-colored suit was sharply tailored. His silver-gray tie was perfect. The white light above traced his features into precise, blade-like lines. He drew in a long breath, straightened his shoulders. No mistakes, he told himself. No emotions. No surprises. Outside, the MC's voice rang clear. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and welcome to the Hamilton Centennial Gala. Please join me in welcoming our CEO, Mr. Jonathan Hamilton. Applause erupted, flashes flickered. Jonathan stepped forward. Sunlight streamed through the glass, bathing him in a golden glow. He smiled, perfectly, the kind of smile born under spotlights. From the service row on the right, Grace Alvarez, 26, recently assigned to the VIP section, was polishing a silver tray. Sweat beaded faintly at her temple. She didn't look toward the stage. She was used to being the shadow among the suits. But when Jonathan reached the podium, she glanced up. The sunlight behind him caught on his collar, and in that light she saw it, a thin red beam, fine as a hair. It glided, then stopped, right on his chest. Her heart missed a beat. She knew that light. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't a spotlight. It was a laser sight, the mark of a sniper's gun. Grace's fingers clenched around the tray, breath hitching. She couldn't shout, couldn't run to him. Any sudden movement would trigger the shot. Only seconds remained. She threw the tray onto the table. A sharp clang turned a few heads, and while others froze in confusion, Grace ran. Her black dress flared, her shoes skidded on the polished floor, the laughter and chatter cut off. Jonathan looked up just in time to see a strange woman sprinting toward the stage. He frowned. "What the?" She didn't answer. Cold hands pressed against his face, and before he could react, she kissed him. The entire hall froze. Flashes exploded. Gasps rippled. "Oh my God! What is happening?" The MC stood motionless. Reporters near the stage raised their cameras. Between rushed breaths, Grace whispered, voice trembling but firm, "Don't move. There's a sniper aiming at you." Jonathan went rigid, eyes wide. A sniper. He was about to push her away, then saw the raw terror in her eyes. Not performance, not calculation. There was no reason a maid would kiss a CEO in front of hundreds, unless she was truly afraid. "Please," she murmured against his lips, "just stay still." He didn't believe her, but instinct took over. Jonathan pretended to play along, sliding an arm around her waist as if it were part of a staged surprise performance. The crowd held its breath, then broke into uneasy applause. Cameras zoomed in, shareholders exchanged awkward glances, a few even chuckled. Then, pop, a muffled sound cracked from somewhere beyond the glass. Most didn't hear it, but Jonathan felt it. A rush of hot air past his neck, then the metallic ting as a bullet struck the bronze statue behind him. Grace hissed, "Move! Now!" She pulled him off the stage, still smiling for the cameras as they slipped toward the side corridor. Flashes kept firing wildly. Some guests thought it was all a PR stunt. The young CEO and his scandalous kiss. Once the backstage door shut, the world outside vanished. No music, only pounding hearts. Jonathan tore himself free. "What have you done?" His voice thundered in the narrow space. "Are you insane? You think this is some PR stunt? You just destroyed my reputation in front of hundreds of cameras. Grace leaned against the wall, chest heaving. No, Mr. Hamilton, I just saved your life. Saved? He let out a bitter laugh. By kissing me in front of the international press? Do you have any idea what deal I just signed? With 3 global corporations? That video will be all over the internet in 10 minutes. She trembled but forced out each word. If I hadn't, you'd be dead by now. I saw the laser. The bullet hit the statue behind you. Didn't you hear it? Jonathan froze for a beat. The image of that hot gust and metallic ping flashed back, but he pushed it away. Enough. I don't believe you. If there was really a shooter, security would have reacted. No one saw anything, except a maid kissing her boss. What do you want? Attention? Money? Grace clenched her fists, tears glimmering but refusing to fall. I don't want anything. I just want you alive enough to be angry at me. He fell silent for half a second. The hallway felt suddenly heavy. Then his tone hardened again. You owe me an explanation. A damn good one. Otherwise, I'll make sure your job ends today. Grace bowed her head. I understand. She turned toward the small glass window. Beyond it, Charleston's sky was painfully blue. Across the rooftops, nothing moved except a drifting bird's shadow. But inside her chest, her heart still pounded, chasing that muffled pop like an echo that wouldn't fade. Jonathan stood still for a few moments, fingers gripping the edge of the wooden table. From the stage, the MC's voice tried to recover the mood. Well, that was quite the surprise, wasn't it, folks? Laughter rippled again. Flashes burst anew. The live broadcast kept rolling. In minutes, the headline, Billionaire CEO kisses his maid in public, would explode across social media. And the media storm of the century would begin, born from one kiss in the golden morning light of Belladonna. Grace whispered softly, almost to herself, You're alive, Mr. Hamilton. That's all that matters. She walked away, her white uniform fading down the long corridor. And Jonathan, still standing there, felt the sunlight pour through the window, glinting off a small scratch on the bronze statue behind him. A thin, cold mark, real enough to chill the blood. By noon, all of Charleston was aware of what had happened that morning, and soon so did the rest of America. Screens in cafes, taxis, hospital lobbies, and even stock exchange floors all played the same clip. A maid rushing onto the stage, cupping the young CEO's face, and kissing him right in the middle of a centennial gala. The caption scrolling across the bottom of the screen read like a verdict, Billionaire caught kissing his maid at gala. Editors threw questions like rain. Was this a stage stunt? Who is that girl? Who handles Hamilton's PR? Close-up shots of Grace's hands gripping Jonathan's jawline were enlarged, framed, and slapped with cheap headlines. On social media, hashtags bloomed like foam, hashtag Hamilton Kiss, hashtag CEO, and Maid hashtag Morning Scandal. Within an hour, the clip had surpassed 1 million views. The market didn't wait to make fun of him. Hamilton's stock opened a dull pale green, then plunged straight down. The finance department sent Jonathan a stark update. 7.8% in 90 minutes. Negative movement due to leadership and PR risk. Their Japanese partners sent a short message in English. Regret, we must postpone. The Houston Energy Group replied coldly, moving our meeting to next week, pending clarification. Jonathan's inbox and calendar dropped meetings like dry leaves. 38th floor, executive office. A still image of the kiss hung on the large screen at the end of the conference table. Beneath it, the stock ticker flickered in relentless red. Jonathan stood by the window, looking out at the blinding Ashley River under the noon sun, his fingers whitening around the back of a chair. Mark, his assistant, flipped through pages with the dry rustle of paper. PR advises silence for 24 hours. Legal requests 0 comments to the press. HR confirms Miss Grace Alvarez is a temp staffer from Belladonna, not on Hamilton's payroll. Mark hesitated. And internal emails are, messy. Jonathan bit the arm of his glasses. What do they call me this time? Corporate Romeo, Mark admitted, wincing. Fine. Jonathan dropped the glasses onto the table, voice flat. Bring her up. The staff dorm behind Belladonna was as silent as after a storm. Grace sat on the edge of her bed, clutching a worn canvas bag, her phone vibrating nonstop. A coworker sent her the video link. Another texted, "Don't go outside. The press is waiting." Some messages were from strangers accusing her of gold digging, attention-seeking, acting. She turned the phone off. The silence that followed was heavy, like a damp blanket. 3 knocks on the door. 2 men in black suits appeared, security badges gleaming. "Miss Alvarez, Mr. Hamilton requests you come to headquarters immediately." She looked down at her hands. The faint marks from gripping the tray earlier were still visible. "Now?" "Yes, now." 38th floor. Jonathan's office was wide and cold, facing the river blazing under the midday light. Grace stood on the gray carpet, the soles of her soft shoes leaving faint dark shadows. Jonathan didn't motion for her to sit. He stood behind his desk, his face sharply cut like a surgeon's blade. "You know why you're here?" Grace nodded. "Because of the kiss." "Because of the kiss," he repeated, voice tight. "And because that clip is bleeding company value by the minute." She swallowed hard, meeting his gaze. "I didn't have another choice. This morning you said backstage something about a gunman." Jonathan emphasized the words, one eyebrow raised. "I want to hear everything again. Slowly, clearly, no drama." Grace gripped her bag strap, inhaling. "I was at the service counter, far right of the ballroom. When you stepped onto the stage, I saw a tiny red dot slide across your collar. It wasn't a reflection or chandelier light. It stopped right over your heart. I recognized it as a laser because I used to work in the lab at school. I looked up toward the glass doors across the street. There's a clear line of sight from the roof of the opposite building." "Did you hear anything?" Jonathan interrupted. Grace nodded. "A few minutes earlier, I'd passed the kitchen area. The swing door kept opening and closing. 2 men were standing near the entrance, whispering, voices from the East Coast. I didn't see their faces because they were turned away, but I heard one of them say, 'Once he raises the glass, take the shot.' The other replied, 'Copy.' That line stuck in my head, so I looked up to see if something was wrong." Jonathan didn't take notes, didn't nod. He just stared, his dark eyes flat and unreadable. "You're good at repeating short lines," he said coolly. "Too bad the whole ballroom and security heard nothing except your little performance." Grace pressed her lips together. "I know how this looks, but I'm not lying." "Good, then continue." His tone stayed cold. "After that, you ran onto the stage and kissed me." "Why kiss?" "Because if I yelled 'danger,' the shooter would have fired. If I ran up to pull you away, they'd react too. I needed to make you stand still long enough for me to block your chest from the line of sight, then move you off stage like it was part of an act. A kiss was the only thing I could think of in 3 seconds." Silence hung between them, taut as a string just plucked. Sunlight spilled across the river, blinding white. Jonathan placed both hands on the desk, giving a dry laugh. "So you expect me to hold a press conference and say, 'Sorry, this wasn't PR, just a maid saving my life by kissing me'? The shareholders will applaud, the partners will reschedule, and the market will stop the sell-off?" He straightened, voice dropping lower. "Do you know what you just did to my reputation?" "I do," Grace answered, eyes steady, "and I know your reputation matters. But this morning, your life mattered more." Jonathan froze for a beat. A small crack flickered across his composure, then sealed again. "Do you have any proof? Photos, video, names, uniforms, faces of the 2 men in the kitchen?" Grace shook her head. "No, I heard and saw for a few seconds. I chose to act." "Then, Miss Alvarez," he said, each word dropping like from a height, "your story isn't enough to save your job or your visa. HR will condash. Dash. 2 sharp knocks at the door. Mark entered, pale as ice. "Sorry, Jonathan. Belladonna Security just called. Urgent." Jonathan didn't look away from Grace, but hit the speakerphone. "Go ahead." The head of security's voice came through, rough and breathless. "Sir, we rescanned the northwest terrace above the ballroom, following the sight line the employee mentioned. We found a 9mm shell casing stuck behind a planter, plus light shoe prints on the ledge. We're sealing off the area and calling Charleston PD. The room seemed to lose all air. The glass wall stopped being transparent. It became a mirror reflecting three motionless figures. Mark swallowed. "Any camera footage of the suspect?" he asked. "Not yet, sir," came the reply. "But we're reloading all external feeds from early morning." Jonathan lowered his hand slowly. The words shell casing and shoe prints cracked through his mind like ice under a hammer. He turned to Grace. She said nothing, just exhaled a little, as if finally able to breathe again. The phone was still on speaker. "Any instructions, sir?" the security chief asked. Jonathan closed his eyes for a second, then spoke, voice sharp and calm again. "Seal the terrace. Secure all evidence. Hand it over to the police. From now on, no one speaks to the press except me." "Understood, sir." The call ended. Silence fell so deep they could hear the ticking of the clock. Jonathan sat down, staring at the veins on the back of his hand. When he finally looked up, his eyes had changed. Less fury, more weight, awareness. "Repeat it for me," he said, voice low, no sarcasm left. "Every detail, from the kitchen, the voices, the words, the distance, the timing, and the laser's direction." Grace nodded. "Yes, sir." She began again carefully, piece by piece, like laying stones across a bridge that had just been revealed. Outside, the noisy media still referred to it as a PR stunt. They didn't yet know that the story had turned dark. A tiny bullet casing had just dragged the glamorous morning into the shadows of a real conspiracy. Jonathan gripped his pen. The infamous clip continued to loop silently on the screen. But now inside the glass office on the 38th floor, one question had replaced all the mockery. Who tried to shoot him at 9:15 a.m.? And why? News that a 9mm shell casing was found on the northwest terrace of the Belladonna Hotel spread through law enforcement channels faster than any press release. By afternoon, federal agents were already on site. Yellow tape stretched like honey stripes, sealing off the service stairwell leading to the roof. Hotel staff were ordered to vacate the area, and all security footage from nearby buildings was seized under emergency warrant. Jonathan stood inside the temporary control room the FBI had set up in a small third-floor conference room. On the wall, multiple screens formed a mosaic. Elevators, hallways, parking lots, emergency exits, and the rooftop opposite, where a latex-gloved hand was now lifting a shell casing. The air reeked of bitter coffee. A gray-haired agent, name tag S. Doyle, spoke crisply. "There are faint shoe prints along the wall edge, roughly size 10. We found a piece of blue nylon fiber caught on a metal hook, possibly from a gunsling. One traffic cam captured a white van parked under a tree between 8:50 and 9:20. License plates obscured." "The weapon?" Jonathan asked, his tone no longer sharp but weighted with focus. "Not recovered yet, but the impact mark on the bronze statue matches a low-angle trajectory, roughly 140 to 160 meters. The shooter picked the slanted morning sun to blind reflective sight lines." Doyle flipped through a folder and slid a photo across the table. "Any recent public enemies, Mr. Hamilton?" Jonathan gave a thin smile. "I'm a CEO. People who dislike me could fill an industry." Doyle didn't smile back. "We'll also need a full list of event contractors, outsourced security, and anyone cleared for rooftop access." "I'll have them handed over immediately." Jonathan turned to Mark. "Get all technical access logs from the past week and the contracts for the lighting, sound, and camera crews." "On it," Mark replied, phone already flashing like a magician's trick. A young agent pointed to a video feed. "Here, 9:07 a.m., the emergency door on the opposite rooftop opens once. Figure passes by, black cap, light jacket, camera loses him for 2 meters, blind spot." Doyle grunted. "Professional enough not to stand out, but not clean enough to disappear. We'll trace from the parking lot." Jonathan shoved his hands in his pockets, recalling that rush of hot air past his neck and the metallic ting. Every snide laugh about the staged performance suddenly sounded childish. For the first time that day, he spoke not as a CEO, but as a son. "If my father were alive, he'd say, 'There's no such thing as an accident right before a keynote.'" Doyle met his gaze. "And we're here to prove that." Outside the Belladonna, the media barricade thickened. Questions flew like needles at any staff who dared appear. Who's the girl? Was it staged? Is Hamilton going to make a statement? How long have they known each other? Every magnified photo of Grace mid-kiss became fodder for venomous captions. Grace didn't return to the hotel. She slipped through the back parking lot, weaving into the row of old staff quarters. Her small room smelled faintly of bleach and soap. She locked the door, slid down to the floor. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Hate messages, bizarre fan emails, and one from Belladonna HR. Suspended temporarily to assist internal investigation and avoid media pressure. She typed several replies, deleted them all, then finally sent, "I understand." The afternoon passed like a fever. She swapped SIM cards and turned off notifications. By nightfall, the footsteps of reporters faded from the hallway. At 10 p.m., the dorm was silent except for the wheezing air conditioner and the chorus of crickets thick as rain. Grace switched on the desk lamp. From beneath her bed, she pulled out a cardboard box. Inside, papers sealed in plastic, ID, bank card, an old MIT student badge, edges worn. The photo showed her younger, with longer hair and wide eyes. At the bottom lay a picture taken in a research lab, a smiling girl beside a middle-aged man in a white shirt, his hand resting lightly on a machine console. Ethan Hamilton, Sr., a whiteboard behind them filled with blue marker equations. She couldn't remember who took the photo, only the look in the man's eyes when he spoke of ethics in engineering. Her fingers brushed the glass. Her throat tightened. I tried to keep my promise. I didn't let him fall without anyone knowing why. A knock startled her. "Grace Alvarez?" A deep, restrained male voice. "It's Jonathan Hamilton. I need to talk to you." She froze, then unlatched the door. Light from the corridor spilled in. Jonathan stood there. No suit jacket, just a dark shirt, tie tucked in his pocket, sleeves rolled to the elbow. His eyes were tired but clear. "How did you know I was here?" she asked, hand still on the doorframe. "Hotel HR," he said plainly, and he held up a worn canvas bag, hers. "Security found this near the service stairwell. I figured you'd come back for it." She stepped aside awkwardly. "Come in." Jonathan entered, scanning the room, neat to the point of sterility, a single bed, a short shelf stacked with second-hand technical manuals, a kettle, and a pack of instant noodles. His gaze paused briefly on the open box. He didn't touch it. "Who are you really, Grace Alvarez?" Her lips curved faintly. "People say I'm the maid who kissed the CEO at the Centennial Gala. Guess that's accurate enough." "Don't joke." His voice wasn't harsh, but taut like a wire. "This morning in the kitchen you said, 'Once he raises the glass, take the shot.' Tonight the FBI confirms a bullet and a casing. This afternoon I hear you've been suspended, like a stain to be scrubbed out of a bad photo. I need to know who you are and how you noticed something my entire system missed." Grace looked down at the box. She hated talking about herself. Every retelling felt like reopening an old wound, but he had asked, in that steady way that made lying impossible. She pushed the box toward him. "Here's part of your answer." Jonathan's eyes fell on the blue card inside. Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Name, Grace Noelia Alvarez. The photo showed her at 21. The expiration date matched the year his father died. He froze. "MIT?" he asked quietly. "You dropped out?" "Not because of grades," she murmured. "Because of life." He said nothing. His fingers lifted the photo beneath, the one with his father. Both were smiling. A yellow sticky note clung to the corner. In handwriting he instantly recognized. "Keep looking for the right questions." E.H. The air thickened. Jonathan held the photo as if it were on fire. His voice fell low, hoarse. "He met you where?" "At the university lab," Grace said. "A student project." He gave a talk on data ethics and infrastructure security. She gave a faint smile. He asked more than he lectured. He liked hearing us argue. Jonathan studied the image. His father's eyes there weren't the same as the ones in the framed portraits. The gaze here was alive, curious, searching. A pang of longing sliced through him. He asked softly, "Why were you at the Belladonna?" Grace sat on the bed's edge. clasping her hands to keep them steady. Because it's close to Hamilton Tower. Because the rent's cheap. Because I was waiting for proof, a witness, or maybe just a morning like today when I saw a line of light that shouldn't exist. Jonathan leaned against the table. And how did you know how to block the shooter's angle? I used to study visual geometry, she replied, calmer now in familiar language. A sniper chooses the cleanest line of sight. I needed to make my body a shield just wide enough to obscure the scope, but not so wide that it would cause panic. A kiss was the only motion my brain could process in 3 seconds. He exhaled, long and heavy. I thought you staged it, he admitted. I was so furious I couldn't hear anything. But now I can't, he hesitated. Ignore what the FBI just confirmed? The fan hummed. Jonathan placed the photo back into the box carefully. There'll be more questions from the FBI, he said. You'll need a lawyer. I'll arrange it. Grace shook her head instinctively. I can't afford a good one. I didn't ask if you could, Jonathan replied, calm but firm. I asked if you'll accept. She looked at him, weighing it. The insults from that morning, fake act, gold digger, still clung like thorns. But the man before her wasn't speaking like a PR strategist. He was speaking like someone who just remembered the voice in an old photograph. All right, she said softly. I'll accept. Jonathan nodded, stood, and paused at the door. His eyes met hers. Thank you for this morning. The simple words fell like a pebble into still water, sending quiet ripples. The door closed. The hallway fell silent again. Inside, Grace tucked the photo back into its plastic sleeve and slid the MIT card into her wallet. She sat a moment longer, listening to her heartbeat slow to normal. Outside, the FBI was threading together footage, tracking plates, prying open every doorway. Inside, a cardboard box had just revealed 2 missing pieces, a student ID and a handwritten note. Somewhere within the belladonna, a tiny shell casing rested in an evidence bag marked with a sterile number. Yet it had done what no hashtag ever could, forced Jonathan Hamilton to ask again about this morning, about his father, and about the Cuban-born girl who had chosen a kiss as her shield in broad daylight. 2 years earlier, Boston was covered in snow. That winter, Miguel Alvarez, a 28-year-old cybersecurity engineer, was often the first to arrive at Hamilton Industries' glass tower. He was a core member of the Atlas security team, the internal protection project built to safeguard thousands of the corporation's financial transactions. While most engineers only saw numbers, Miguel noticed the rhythms that went off beat, like an irregular heartbeat on a monitor. One late night, he discovered it, a sequence of small, encrypted transactions that repeated every week at 3 a.m. The total wasn't large, just a few $100,000, but the receiving address led to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, authorized by someone inside the firm. He printed the log, sealed it in an envelope, and decided that the next morning he would meet directly with Ethan Hamilton Sr., the founding CEO, the man he always called the one who built ethics into code. He never got the chance. The next morning, the radio blared a breaking story. Private jet belonging to Mr. Ethan Hamilton has lost contact 20 minutes after takeoff from Logan Airport. No survivors reported. Miguel's hands shook so hard that the paper slipped from his grasp. The ink smudged, but the words Cayman Holdings and Route 1 D7F9A remained clear. Something blocked his throat. Not just grief, but the realization that someone had gotten ahead of him. 3 days later, Richard Hale, the vice president of finance, announced he would temporarily assume leadership while Jonathan, the late CEO's son, flew back from Europe. In the emergency meeting, Hale spoke of a severe data breach within the Atlas system. When the code lines lit up on the big screen, Miguel Alvarez's name stood out among the flagged accounts. He jumped to his feet. I didn't do that. The logs were altered, but no one listened. Security entered and handcuffed him before he could say another word. The photo of him being led away spread across the company intranet within an hour. At MIT, Grace, then a junior, saw the news on her phone in class. The headline cut like a blade, Hamilton engineer arrested for data leak scandal. She ran through the night to the police station. They wouldn't let her in. A month later, Miguel was formally charged with unauthorized disclosure of financial data causing high-level damage. No attorney wanted the case because the plaintiff was the most powerful corporation in the state. The new CEO, Jonathan Hamilton, freshly appointed, signed the internal investigation report presented by Richard Hale, affirming that the evidence was complete with no sign of tampering. That was the day Grace lost two things at once, her brother and her faith. She withdrew from MIT, sold her laptop, gave up her apartment, and headed south to Charleston, where Hamilton Industries had its headquarters. Her only goal, to find out who had destroyed her brother's life. She applied for a job as a hotel maid at the Belladonna, the same building where Hamilton's executive offices occupied the top floors. Beneath the uniform, she hid a small hard drive, Miguel's last gift to her, sent the night before his arrest. The file was named Atlas_leak.ghost. No one knew she'd once been an MIT student. No one knew she lived on day-old bread and watered-down coffee. The only thing she kept was a single photo, her and Miguel smiling outside the MIT lab, sunlight filtering through the window behind them. For 2 years, she worked, listened, and memorized every name that passed through Belladonna. She knew Hale still held the vice president title, still signed billion-dollar deals, and still preached corporate ethics in every speech. All she needed was one piece of proof, one strange flicker of light, to prove Miguel's innocence. And that morning, the red laser glinting across Jonathan Hamilton's collar was the signal she never expected to come in such a way. That evening in the small room, Grace confided everything to him. Jonathan stood motionless, back against the wall, arms folded. The only sound was the clock ticking. "When he died," she said quietly, "Miguel was on his way to report it. But Mr. Hamilton Sr. never made it onto that return flight." Jonathan closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw the photo he had looked at earlier, his father smiling, arm around that same small girl in the lab. A sharp ache ran through his chest. "You're saying," he spoke slowly, voice low, "that my father was killed? And the one who framed your brother worked inside Hamilton?" Grace didn't answer. She just looked at him, her eyes caught between fear and desperate faith. Jonathan turned away, shoulders tense. The desk lamp cast a hard edge along his jaw. In his head, fragments of memory, his father's flight, the scandal, Richard Hale, snapped together into a pattern. He murmured almost to himself, "Richard Hale was the only one in the finance office the night my father left." Grace's head lifted sharply. Jonathan turned back, his eyes like steel. "If what you're saying is true, Alvarez, then my father and your brother were both victims of the same hand." That look held no longer mere suspicion, but something heavier, a silent promise forming between them, to uncover the truth that had been buried. The office on the 38th floor was bathed in dim white light. 11:47 p.m. Only a few windows in the Hamilton Tower still glowed, scattered like the last embers of a fire. Jonathan sat alone, a yellowed folder open before him, archival hard copies he had just ordered pulled from internal storage. Each page turned with a soft crackle, like tearing through memory. Data leak, Atlas Security Project. The first page bore the signature, Richard Hale. Below, the conclusion line read, "Determination, employee Miguel Alvarez is responsible for the system breach and data leak." Jonathan leaned back, eyes half closed. His breath came slow and heavy, as if swallowing a stone named mistake. He remembered. 2 years ago, he had just turned 30. Fresh from London, inheriting a company in crisis, and mourning a father lost too soon. Hale had been the first to greet him in the lobby, saying calmly, "Let's handle this cleanly." Any sign of instability scares shareholders. Jonathan had signed that report in 10 minutes. No verification, no questions, no clue that the line, reported by Richard Hale, was the first incision in a wound that would take years to expose. He dropped his pen. The metallic clink against the glass desk rang dry and final. Then he opened the digital archive, typing his highest-level access code. In the Atlas access logs, one name recurred too often, Hale, R. Most alarming, he had logged into the Atlas system 2 hours before the plane crash that killed Hamilton Sr. The door opened. Grace stepped in, holding a cup of coffee. "I figured you haven't eaten since noon." Jonathan didn't look up. "I found what your brother tried to send." She froze. "What did you say?" He turned the screen toward her. Hale was the one who reported Miguel, and he also handled security at the gala that morning. Grace's face went pale. That's impossible. I saw him in the technical corridor the night before the event. He said he was testing the stage transmission line. I thought it was routine. Jonathan tapped the desk. He always has a legitimate reason. But why would a CFO be checking sound systems? Grace sat opposite him, gripping her cup tightly. I'll check again. The Belladonna's security footage wasn't completely wiped. I made backup copies during night shifts. You still have access? Not anymore, but I remember the old directory path and the manager's login code. Jonathan studied her, suspicion and admiration crossing in his eyes. You've been preparing for this a long time, haven't you? Her voice was quiet. I just didn't think it would come this soon. They worked until dawn. In the old surveillance room beneath the hotel, dust lay thick over the aging CRT monitors. Grace plugged an external drive into the backup server. Grainy footage flickered to life. Timestamps, angles, static. This is the night before the gala, she said, fast-forwarding to 10:47 p.m. The corridor glowed under tired yellow bulbs. A tall, gray-haired man in a gray suit, Richard Hale. He stopped by the electrical room door, speaking to someone hidden just out of frame. Jonathan leaned forward. Can you zoom in? Old cameras. But wait. Grace adjusted the brightness controls. The second figure sharpened, black jacket, baseball cap, headset. Hale pulled a small metallic object from his vest pocket, a silver lighter engraved with an R, and handed it over. Jonathan shot to his feet, the chair crashing behind him. God! Hale said something inaudible. The other man pocketed the lighter, nodded, and disappeared toward the back exit. Hale straightened his tie, answered his phone, and smiled. The camera caught every motion in eerie silence. That's him, Grace whispered. The shooter. Jonathan didn't reply, his jaw clenched tight as steel. That lighter, my father had one just like it, custom made for the family. Only two existed, one for him, one for Hale. The air froze. Grace pulled up the next clip. The morning of the gala, same hallway. Hale was gone. But the man in the black jacket appeared briefly, carrying a long case. Minutes later, the footage cut to the ballroom crowd, the fatal kiss, the bullet striking bronze. Jonathan switched off the monitor. The room went dark except for the red blink of the server light. We can't go public, he said. Not yet. We need proof, transactions, links. I still have access to Hale's internal accounts. Grace understood immediately. So we work off the grid. Jonathan nodded. I'll keep him occupied. You recover the original Atlas logs. I want to know what he's hiding. She bit her lip. If he finds out, then he'll do to us what he did to my father and your brother. Jonathan cut in, voice cold. Grace looked at him for a long time. In the dim light, his face was hard, but his eyes held more than anger now. There was resolve and something faintly human beneath it. Trust. All right, she said, I'll do it. But you need to be ready. For what? To lose everything. A long silence. Jonathan finally nodded. If that's the price for truth, then I'll pay it. Outside, Charleston slept. Inside, two strangers sat surrounded by wires and flickering screens. On one untouched feed, another camera caught Hale leaving the hotel, climbing into a black SUV. He leaned down, saying something to the driver. The streetlight reflected off his face, cold as steel. Grace slowed the playback, eyes locked on the screen. As the car pulled away, she paused the frame. A glint of silver flashed in the driver's hand, the engraved lighter. Jonathan murmured, "Now we know who pulled the trigger?" Grace nodded, heart pounding in her chest. The final frame trembled, then faded to black. On the dark screen, their reflections hovered a CEO slowly losing faith in his past, and a woman long buried by it. Charleston, 1:56 a.m. Hamilton Tower glowed faintly under maintenance lights. Jonathan swiped his ID card. Click. The magnetic lock disengaged. He wasn't afraid of being caught. He was afraid that Hale would find out what he was doing. Since the assassination attempt had been uncovered, Hale had seized control of all internal security systems under the pretext of an internal investigation. That meant every mouse click, every file open, could be under his surveillance. Tonight, Jonathan wasn't here to hide. He was here to take back what belonged to his father, the Atlas data. He wasn't alone. Grace followed close behind, sweat darkening her back, a laptop hidden beneath her coat. They stood in the shadow of the parking level, both zipped into black jackets. They had waited for this precise moment, the time when the automated security system switched to low monitoring mode, leaving only one guard on camera duty. Jonathan swiped his card. A green light blinked. The door slid open. "From now on, there's no turning back," he whispered. Grace's voice was husky, tight with tension. "I've come too far to turn back." They slipped into the empty lobby. White light spilled across the polished tiles like a cold lake. Every step echoed sharply. The elevator mirrored their faint, trembling reflections. At 2:03 a.m., the elevator dinged, an unnervingly loud sound in the dead silence. Grace's fingers closed around his wrist. 42nd floor, Jonathan said. "Server room." The doors opened. Cold air from the cooling system swept out, smelling of ozone and metal. Rows of servers lined up like sentinels, their red and green indicators blinking like hundreds of watchful eyes. Grace opened her laptop and plugged in the portable drive. The screen lit up, lines of code racing across. Accessing archive node, Atlas backup deleted. Jonathan stood by the door, eyes locked on the corridor. "How long?" he asked. 4 minutes, if we're lucky. And if we're not? We don't have an if not. Her fingers tapped steadily. Data began to pour into the drive. She counted silently. 10%, 25%, 40%. A bead of sweat slipped down her temple, landing on the steel table. Suddenly, click. The sound of a door unlocking down the hall. Both froze. Jonathan motioned for her to shut off the screen. Footsteps followed, slow, heavy, deliberate. Grace whispered, "Impossible. Only you and I are logged into the system." Jonathan pulled out his phone, checking the internal camera feed, but the screen was black. The surveillance channel was offline. The footsteps drew closer. A flashlight beam cut through the crack beneath the door. Jonathan shifted, stepping in front of Grace. She couldn't stop the download now. 82%. 86%. He spoke softly, so quiet it was almost breath. "If we die tonight, I'm glad it's with someone brave." Grace's voice trembled. "Don't say that." "Then finish the download." The server room door burst open. Blinding white light flooded in. Richard Hale stood in the doorway, shirt unbuttoned, tie loose, a black Glock gleaming in his hand under the sterile light. Jonathan didn't need to ask. Hale had been watching them the entire time. Hale's voice rasped with mock amusement. "I was wondering who'd be stupid enough to sneak back in after midnight. Turns out it's you, and the heroic little Maid. Too bad this story doesn't get a happy ending." Jonathan straightened, placing himself squarely between Hale and Grace. "Put the gun down, Hale. You think you can order me around? Your daddy's not here to protect you anymore." Grace silently pulled the hard drive from the port, just as the progress bar hit 100%. She slipped it into her coat pocket, heart hammering. Hale stepped forward, raising the gun. "I'll give you one chance, John. Hand over the drive. Don't make me clean up 2 curious corpses tonight." Jonathan's voice was low but steady. "You're right, Hale. My father's gone, but he did teach me one thing. When a man hides behind numbers, it's because he's afraid of the truth." In that split second, Grace's eyes darted to the back of the room, to the main power switch, its red handle glowing faintly. She whispered, "Jonathan." He understood. Their eyes met, once silently. As Hale took another step forward, Jonathan raised his hands as if surrendering, then suddenly lunged, yanking the power panel down. A flash of blue exploded. Sparks burst across the room. Every light went out. Alarms wailed through the tower. In the chaos, Grace backed toward the emergency exit, clutching the hard drive to her chest. Hale cursed and fired. The gunshot ripped through the dark. A body fell, no one could tell whose. Smoke spread fast. Red emergency lights blinked wildly. Through the blaring sirens and static, only one sentence echoed before the darkness swallowed them both. "Run, Grace! Don't stop!" Smoke still hung thick in the server room. The red alarm lights flashed in intervals, washing the rows of metal racks in a blood-colored glow. Jonathan pushed himself up, his shoulder burning, the smell of scorched wiring mixed with gunpowder. In the corner, Grace was curled up on the floor, clutching the hard drive to her chest. Heavy footsteps echoed. Richard Hale emerged from the haze, the barrel of his gun still smoking. Sweat streaked his face, but his eyes were calm, almost serene. "Well done, Jonathan," he said in a low, steady tone as if lecturing. "You've got more guts than your father thought. But unfortunately, you're just as late as he was." Jonathan clenched his jaw, stepping in front of Grace. Blood from the scrape on his arm had soaked through his sleeve. "Hale, what did you do to my father?" Hale gave a rough laugh, raising the gun slightly. "Your father, Ethan Hamilton, was the only man who ever saw through me. He discovered the offshore accounts I used to funnel money through the Cayman Islands, a saint among wolves, and he threatened to expose everything after that flight." He tilted his head. The red light gleamed off his twisted smile. "And you know what? That plane never landed, because it was never meant to." The air froze. Grace lifted her head, eyes wide, voice trembling. "He killed your father, Jonathan, and he framed my brother to cover it up." It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Every sound disappeared, leaving only the pounding in Jonathan's ears. He stared at Hale, half disbelieving, half terrified to believe. But that smug look was the only answer he needed. "You killed him," Jonathan said, stepping forward. "And you blamed an innocent man." Hale shrugged. "I call it corporate evolution. The weak get erased. Your father was too idealistic, and you, too naive. But I should thank the girl," he added, glancing at Grace. "Thanks to her, the FBI believed the assassination attempt was just an isolated incident. A perfect performance." Grace forced herself up, trembling, blood seeping from her shoulder where Hale's warning shot had grazed her. She staggered back but didn't release the drive. Jonathan caught her as she faltered. Hale narrowed his eyes, raising the gun. "The game's over. Hand me the drive, Jonathan. Don't let her die for nothing." Jonathan didn't move. His voice came out low, each word deliberate. "You're wrong, Hale. The game's just begun." Hale squeezed the trigger. The explosion of the shot cracked through the air. Jonathan barely heard Grace's scream before she lunged forward, shielding him. The bullet tore through her left shoulder, splattering blood across her white uniform. "Grace!" She collapsed, eyes wide, lips trembling. "The drive! Don't let him! Take it!" Jonathan shouted, grabbing the fallen gun from Hale's stunned hand as the older man staggered backward. Sirens wailed from the hallway. Shouts, footsteps, the heavy pound of boots. "FBI, drop the weapon!" The door burst open. Flashlights cut through the smoke. Hale turned, trying to fire again, but the agents were faster. 3 sharp shots rang out. Hale fell hard, gun clattering away, a crooked grin still frozen on his lips. Agent Doyle rushed in, barking orders. "CEO Hamilton, step back! Area secure!" Jonathan didn't hear him. He dropped to his knees beside Grace, pulling her into his arms. Her body trembled. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. "Don't talk," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You're going to be fine. Do you hear me?" Grace gave a weak smile, tears shining in her eyes. "You finally believe me." "Don't say that!" Jonathan squeezed her hand, her blood hot and slick against his palm. "You saved me twice." "It's my turn now." The noise around them faded, the alarms, the shouts, the radios, all distant. Jonathan pressed his forehead to hers. "Don't you dare die on me, Grace." "Not after all this." Her eyes fluttered. Her lips trembled. "If I don't make it, tell Miguel that I—" "No!" Jonathan cut her off, gripping her tighter. "You'll tell him yourself. I promise." Emergency lights strobed through the glass, red and white flashing across her pale face. Agents dragged Hale past them, alive, handcuffed, blood soaking his collar. As he passed Jonathan, he muttered with a twisted smile, "You win, Jonathan. But remember, I'm the one who taught you how to play." Jonathan didn't respond. He just watched as Grace was lifted onto a stretcher, her face ghostly under the flickering ambulance light. In his hand, the small hard drive was still slick with blood. the final proof linking two deaths. Ethan Hamilton and Miguel Alvarez. He stood staring out through the glass as dawn began to spill over the Charleston skyline. His chest heaved, but his voice when it came was steady. No one else is going to die for this truth. And for the first time, Jonathan Hamilton felt himself stepping into his father's legacy, not through power, but through courage. The monitor beeped steadily in the white hospital room. Morning sunlight filtered through thin curtains, casting a soft, misty glow across Grace's face. She stirred, feeling a sharp sting in her left arm, her shoulder still tightly bandaged. The smell of disinfectant mingled faintly with the aroma of watered-down coffee somewhere in the vicinity. When she opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was Jonathan Hamilton, slouched in the chair beside her bed, shirt wrinkled, dark circles shadowing his eyes. A cold cup of coffee rested in his hands. It looked like he hadn't slept in 2 nights. Grace smiled faintly. "You're still here." Jonathan looked up, and for a moment, every layer of his usual composure fell away. "You scared the hell out of me," he said, voice low and hoarse. "The doctor said the bullet just grazed your shoulder bone. 2 more inches and—" She cut him off with a wince. "And I wouldn't have to hear you scolding me right now." Jonathan let out a small laugh, a tired, real, and rare one. He reached over to adjust her blanket, his touch so gentle it was almost hesitant, as though afraid to hurt her. "FBI took your statement. Hale's been arrested. He confessed to everything. The plane crash, Miguel's setup, the whole laundering network." Grace's eyes shimmered. "My brother's name. It's cleared?" Jonathan nodded. "They reopened the case. He's no longer branded a traitor." He paused, gaze lowering. "I'm sorry, Grace. I signed that report. I helped bury his name." Grace smiled weakly. "You didn't know. Just like I didn't know who I could trust." He fell silent, hands clasped tightly together, then spoke slowly, barely above a whisper. "I believed everything they said about your brother, but now I only believe what I see in your eyes." She looked up. In the soft light, his eyes had the color of a morning after the storm, tired, raw, but clear. "Jonathan." Her voice trembled slightly. He leaned forward, resting one hand on the bed's edge, hesitant but close. "You saved me, twice. Once from a bullet, and once from myself." Grace gave a faint laugh. "You're starting to sound romantic." "No," he said, shaking his head gently, eyes never leaving hers. "Just honest." The moment lingered, silent, suspended. Jonathan bent down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. It was feather-light, like a breath, but it made Grace's eyes fill with tears. When he pulled back, she whispered, "I thought you didn't believe in feelings." Jonathan smiled softly. "I do now, because you showed me that feelings can be evidence too." For a while, neither spoke. Sunlight stretched across the tulips on her bedside table, pale yellow, the color of mended hope. He had brought them early that morning. Grace's voice was barely audible. "After I leave here, what will you do?" He looked out the window where the sun climbed across the city glass. "I'll rebuild Hamilton Industries, under the name my father once dreamed of, a place built on honesty. And, if you'll let me, I want you there." She chuckled softly. "A wounded maid? That's your big recruit?" He tilted his head, eyes warm. "No, a woman who once ran onto a stage to save a fool." They held each other's gaze. Outside, a doctor's footsteps echoed down the corridor, fading away, leaving only their quiet breathing and the soft curve of Grace's smile in the light. As Jonathan stood to leave, she called after him softly, "Jonathan?" He paused at the door. "Thank you for believing me." He turned, and the smile that crossed his face was rare and real, so real it seemed to brighten the entire room. "No, Grace. Thank you for teaching me how to believe." He closed the door gently behind him. Outside, golden sunlight stretched down the hospital corridor. And inside the small room, the woman who had lived 2 years in darkness finally saw a real sunrise. 1 month later, spring had come to Charleston. The oak trees along Meeting Street were lined with fresh, green leaves. Morning light glinted off the glass facade of Hamilton Tower. And for the first time, the press room doors opened not to conceal the truth, but to tell it. Jonathan Hamilton stepped onto the stage. Behind him hung a simple backdrop, the new Hamilton Industries logo, with a small inscription beneath it, "Integrity Rebuilt." Dozens of cameras flashed. Microphones crowded the podium. The air was heavy with anticipation. He wore a gray suit without a tie, eyes steady on the sea of reporters. The cold composure of the powerful CEO was gone. In its place stood a man who had walked through loss and rediscovered his own humanity. "1 month ago," he began, voice low but steady, "Hamilton Industries stood on the edge of collapse. An assassination attempt, a cover-up, and a lie that lasted 2 years. All of it traced back to a man I once called my mentor." Camera shutters clicked in rapid bursts. Jonathan paused, turned a page of his notes. "Richard Hale has been charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit assassination. He not only caused the death of my father, Ethan Hamilton, but framed an innocent man, Miguel Alvarez, a security engineer, to hide his money laundering scheme." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Jonathan waited a few seconds, then continued. "I once signed the report that condemned him, and that was the most foolish signature of my life. Today I'm here to say this publicly. Miguel Alvarez was innocent. He stood for something we all forgot, the truth." At first there was only hesitant applause. Then it grew louder, spreading across the hall. Some journalists bowed their heads to take notes. Others exchanged looks. Few had ever seen a CEO admit fault so openly. Jonathan drew in a breath and set the papers aside. His voice deepened, softer now. "But today isn't just about closing a case. It's about acknowledging the person who made this day possible." The atmosphere shifted. Jonathan looked toward the back of the room, to the corner where Grace Alvarez stood quietly in a simple white dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. She hadn't expected to be mentioned. "They called her a maid," Jonathan said, "but to me she was the woman who saved my life, and the soul of Hamilton Industries." The flashes erupted again. Every eye turned toward her. Grace froze, fingers clutching the folded note in her coat pocket. Her throat tightened as Jonathan went on. "I owe her more than a thank you. Because she didn't just save me from a bullet, she forced me to look at myself. Truth doesn't come from power. It comes from the courage of those who speak up when no one believes them." A reporter raised his hand. "Mr. Hamilton, is she here today?" Jonathan smiled faintly. "She is, but she doesn't like attention, and I won't make her take it." He gave a small bow, ending his statement to a swell of applause. Cameras followed him as he stepped off the stage and disappeared behind the curtains, where Grace stood waiting, eyes shimmering with tears. The backstage door closed, muffling the noise of the outside world. She wiped her eyes and tried to smile. "You didn't have to say that on camera," she said softly. "I just did what anyone would have done." Jonathan stopped in front of her. The golden light from the exit framed him. Tired but peaceful, his words came slowly, deliberately, as if they had waited too long to be spoken. "Grace, you saved me from a bullet and from a life lived blind. You taught me that trust isn't something you sign on paper. It's something you hold in your heart." She gave a teary laugh. "You really do know how to talk to a crowd, Mr. Hamilton." He chuckled, stepping closer. "And now I just want to say this, not as a CEO, but as a man who's been saved." He reached out his hand, warm, steady. "You saved me. Now let me protect you." Grace stared at that hand. The same hand that once commanded thousands, now trembling slightly as it waited for hers. "If I say yes," she whispered, "what will you do?" Jonathan tilted his head, a small smile touching his lips. "I'll start over. Not with a corporation, but with someone who still believes in the light." She laughed softly through her tears. "Then, yes." The applause from the hall still echoed faintly beyond the curtain, but backstage there were only two people. A promise and a beginning. Jonathan took her hand and gently pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Welcome back to the light, Grace Alvarez." Outside, a camera caught the backstage door opening, sunlight spilling in. And for Hamilton Industries, as well as for them, a new era had just begun. A year after the scandal, the Charleston sky was crystal clear. Sunlight glinted off the glass facade of Hamilton Tower, once a symbol of downfall, now a monument to rebirth. A banner stretched across the front lobby read, Hamilton Industries, 1 year of renewal. People called it the celebration of a reborn empire. Grace stood backstage dressed in a simple white suit. Her name badge read, Grace Alvarez, head of ethics and data security. A year ago, she'd been the invisible maid. Today, she was leading the very department her brother had once built. The Atlas system, now restored and expanded across the globe. In the front row sat Miguel Alvarez, the brother she once thought she'd lost forever. He wore a blue shirt with the Hamilton logo, smiling with quiet pride. When she glanced his way, he lifted a thumb and winked, a silent message. You did it. The music faded. All lights turned toward the stage. Jonathan Hamilton stepped out. He was still the man who once made headlines, but the arrogance was gone. White shirt, no tie, posture upright yet humble. When he spoke, his voice carried, not as the speech of a CEO, but as the words of someone who had fallen and learned to rise again. A year ago, this place was the center of doubt. Today, it stands as proof of the only thing that can save an empire, truth. Scattered applause turned into a wave. Jonathan continued. Richard Hale has paid for his crimes. Miguel Alvarez, once wrongfully accused, has been reinstated as chief engineer of the Atlas system. The hall erupted in applause. Miguel rose slightly, nodding modestly. His eyes sought Grace's, glowing with the pride of a brother who had watched his sister walk through hell to bring both their names back into the light. Jonathan paused, drew in a breath, and smiled softly. But today isn't just a celebration of a company. It's a tribute to the people who taught me that even in darkness, there are those who never stop believing in what's right. He looked toward the backstage area, right where Grace was standing. Her heart skipped a beat. A year ago, she kissed me to save my life. Today, he stopped, his gaze locking on hers. I'm going to kiss her to begin the rest of our lives. The entire hall fell silent. Then slowly, every spotlight followed him as he descended the stage steps, walking straight through the crowd toward the wings. Grace froze, blushing, half-stunned, half-overwhelmed. Jonathan stopped in front of her, cameras flashing. The audience held its breath. He reached out his hand, his voice low enough for her alone. No bullets this time. No fear. Only truth. And you. She smiled through tears. You do realize you're breaking every PR rule right now? He tilted his head, grinning. Good. Because love doesn't follow headlines. And amid the cheers, the lights, and the clicking shutters, he kissed her. The second kiss. No longer a distraction, no longer an act of desperation. It was a kiss between two people who had lost everything, now standing before hundreds with nothing left to hide. The hall erupted in applause. Hamilton employees cheered, some even cried. Miguel stood first, clapping with a broad grin. Jonathan leaned his forehead against Grace's and whispered, The first time you saved my life. This time, you saved my soul. Grace's voice trembled. You saved yourself, Jonathan. I just reminded you how to breathe. He laughed quietly, taking her hand. Then remind me every day. I don't want to forget again. They walked together onto the stage, facing the sea of people still applauding. Jonathan lifted her hand and spoke into the microphone. Hamilton Industries wasn't built on steel or money. It was rebuilt on honesty, by people like her who chose the light no matter the cost. Thunderous applause filled the hall. Behind them, the giant screen lit up with a photo of Ethan Hamilton and the words, In memory of integrity, the legacy lives on. Grace looked up, tears glistening as she smiled. Jonathan squeezed her hand gently. He's smiling, you know, he murmured. I know, she whispered back. And so is my brother. From the audience, Miguel raised a coffee cup instead of champagne, mouthing, To new beginnings. Grace laughed softly, then turned to Jonathan, the man who had once been cold, skeptical, unreachable. Now standing beside her in the light, his hand still holding hers. Outside the glass walls, the Charleston sky exploded with fireworks. The tower gleamed bright, LED letters streaming down the facade. 1 year of truth, one future together. Surrounded by light and cheers, they shared a silent look, a look that held every promise yet to come. The first kiss had saved a life. The second opened a lifetime. And for the first time, in an empire once buried in shadows, love was finally called by its true name, light.